Welcome back. Now that we know how to add sounds to our animations, it's time to add some footsteps, as our character is quite silent when running, and we'd like to hear those footsteps as we're running. And you may have noticed that we have been kicking up dust with our running animation, and that's because we're actually playing a particle effect system with a notify that exists in this running animation that came with us from the Valley of the Ancients example project. And we'll see how those work. So I'd like to go back to Ancient Content, into the Audio folder, and into Sound Waves, and Echo, and Foley. And hopefully you've played around with some of these sounds and seen that we have quite a few sound assets here that we can put to use. Now the first thing I'd like to look at are some of these running sounds. In particular, I'd like to take a look at these sounds that have rock in the name. They're called SFX, Char Echo, Foley FS, Rock Run, NL. And they sound like footsteps falling on rock. I'd like to make a meta sound using these. So let's go back to our content folder, into Audio and Meta Sounds. And we can make a new meta sound by going to Sounds, Meta Sound Source, and we can call this SFX underscore rock underscore run. So let's double click this. And here in our meta sound, we can add an input, and I'm going to call this input rock run. And I'm going to change its type to wave asset and check the is array box. Now it's going to be an array because we have multiple rock run sounds. If we go back to Ancient Content, Audio, Sound Waves, Echo, Foley, we can search for these rock run sound waves. So I'm going to search for rock underscore run, and here we see that we have 18 different rock run sounds. So I'd like to add each of these sound waves as array elements. Now an easy way to do this is to reposition these panels. So I have my default array here, and with all 18 sound waves selected, I can drag them from the content browser onto the default array. And now I see that I have 18 array elements, each set to the 18 different sound waves. So I didn't have to click plus 18 times and select these from the drop-downs. That would take forever. So now that I have these in my input rock run, I can drag it in, and now I have access to this array, and I can shuffle these. So I'd like to get a shuffle node, and we're going to choose wave asset array and plug that rock run straight into it. And our input is going to go into the next input pin, and we're going to want a wave player. So from on next, we can drag out, type wave player, and get one of these nodes. And our on finished can plug into our on finished in our output. Now I'd like to randomize the pitch and the volume. So from our input on play, I can drag out and get a random float. And for this random float, I'd like to set the minimum to 3 and the maximum to 1, and hook this in to the pitch shift. Now notice the shuffle node has enable shared state, and it says set to enable shared state across instances of this meta sound. This is an optimization technique. If we check this, which we should, then if multiple instances of this meta sound are being played simultaneously, they'll share data between them, avoiding copies. Now let's randomize the volume just a bit by dragging off, getting a random float, and for this random float, I'd like our minimum to be 0.5 and our max to be 1. And we'll get our out left, multiply audio by float, and multiply by this random value, and hook that up to out mono. And finally, we need to take our wave asset value and hook that into the wave asset input for the wave player. And now we can press play. And we get a random footstep sound. And this sounds great. Now we can add this meta sound to our running animations. So first I'm going to go out to my Blueprints folder, into Characters, Animations, and look for my running animation that I'm using. And I'm now using my Sword and Shield Run retargeted animation. And I'd like to play this footstep sound whenever the foot hits the ground. So I can use the scrubber to scrub through to where the foot starts hitting the ground, right about there, and I can add a sound notify. And I'm actually going to add a new notify track and call this rock run underscore L, as this will be for the left foot. And just making sure, yes, it is the left foot. So for the rock run L, I'd like a sound notify. And to make this easy on myself, I can go to my audio folder in Metasounds and select SFX rock run. Now when I add a play sound notify here, that sound will already be set. So adding a play sound notify, I now have that footstep. Now that's the left foot, but I'm also going to want the right foot. So I'm going to scrub through to where the right foot hits the ground here, right about where the heel touches, and right click. And I'm just going to add a new track and call this one rock run underscore R and place this sound notify here. So play sound, and there it is. Now if I press play, we have footsteps. Excellent. And we can play test in the world and see how this feels. And it already feels quite a bit better. Awesome. Now, these footsteps aren't the only sound assets we have. We can go back to ancient content, audio, sound waves, echo, Foley, and we also have sounds for the pouches on our character. If I search for pouch, we have these pouch-heavy sounds. And they're the sounds that we would hear from those pouches bouncing around, which is great. I'd like to make a meta sound for this as well. So I can go to my audio meta sounds folder and make a new meta sound. So we'll go to sounds, meta sound source, and call this one SFX pouch heavy. And this is very much going to be the same process. We'll add an input. I'll call this one pouch heavy. And we're going to change this to a wave asset, and check is array. And we'll want to add to this input array. So we'll go to ancient content, audio, sound waves, echo, Foley, and search for pouch. And we have these pouch heavy sounds. Selecting all of them, I can then drag them in to that default array. And there are 11 array elements. Now we can drag pouch heavy back out, and we'll shuffle these as well as use a wave player. So dragging out of pouch heavy, I can simply type shuffle and get the correct type, and hook up on play to next, and drag the value out and get a wave player. And we're going to hook up on next straight to play and on finished to our output on finished. Now I'd like to randomize this a bit, just like our others. So from the input, I'll get a random float. And for this, I'm going to set the minimum to -2 and the max to 0.5. Now you might be wondering where I'm getting these values from. You can experiment until you get the values that you like, but really I'm using values from the Metasounds that were created in the Valley of the Ancient project. There were these Metasounds already. We just deleted them, remember? And that's because we didn't have our Metasound plugin enabled yet. But now we're getting the practice of making these ourselves. So I can hook up value to pitch shift and drag out of the input and get another random float. And for the min, we'll use 0.8. For the max, we'll use 1. And we'll multiply out left by this float value and hook that up to out mono. And now we have a meta sound for the pouch heavy. And we can add this to our sword and shield run animation. I'm going to add this slightly after our footsteps, right about here. And I'm going to add a notify track called pouch heavy. And I can open my content drawer, go to my audio metasounds folder, and select pouch heavy. And add a new sound notify. So play sound, And there's my pouch heavy. And I'll add one right here, just after the other footstep. So let's see how this sounds. I think that sounds great. Now, we also have cloth sounds for when we're running. If we go back and take a look at the Foley folder again, we can search for cloth _ run. And we have these sounds. So I'd like to add these as well. Now, at this point, you know how to create a meta sound. So I'm going to give this to you as a challenge and simply time-lapse my creation of this one. So you can pause the video if you like, or watch the time-lapse to see the values that I use. And now that I have my cloth run sound effect, I can go back to my sword and shield run and add this. And I'll add a new notify track and call this cloth run. And I can go back to my meta sounds folder, select cloth run, and I'm going to add this just after the pouch heavy. So right here, I'll add a play sound, and right here at the very end, we'll add another one. And we'll see how this sounds. And that sounds great. And we can play test this in the game. That sounds awesome. So now that we have these sound effects, we can add them to our other run animations. Now, I'd like to show you something. If we go to Content and Ancient Content, and go into Characters, Echo, Animations, we have our jog forward animation, among others. And if we open it, wow, take a look at that. We have all these notifies. Now, since we deleted all those meta sounds, these are all blank. Their sound is set to none. But we can set these here. Now, luckily, they have tracks that are labeled. We have footstep right sound, footstep left sound, along with pouch and cloth. So that should tell us what sound effects go where. For footstep right sound, we're going to be using our meta sound, which we created, called rock run. And we can simply click and drag it up to our sound right there with that notify selected. So we can select each of these and drag rock run right up to it. So this isn't too big of a hassle. So that takes care of the footstep left and right. And next we have the pouch. We can select that and get our SFX pouch heavy and drag it in. And we'll do that for all the notifies in the Foley pouch sound notify bar. And finally, we have the cloth sound, for which we have cloth run. And once we've set all those sound effects, we can press play and we can hear what it sounds like. And it sounds great. Now, remember I mentioned that we had those little dust puffs being spawned right there as the foot hits the ground. That's because we have another type of notify. And this one plays not a sound, but a Niagara system. Niagara systems are Unreal Engine's newest way to make visual effects. The Play Niagara particle effect type of notify has a Niagara system instead of a sound. And if we browse to the asset, we can double click it, and this is the Niagara editor. And here in the viewport, I can hold Alt and right click to zoom in and see what this little puff looks like. So now that we know about this, we can use this footstep dust Niagara system in our other running animation. Why don't we do that? So I'm going to go into Blueprints, Characters, Animations, and open my Sword and Shield run. And we can add a notify. In fact, our notify track called 1 is still here. We can rename this to dust particles. And we can find this Niagara system by opening its editor, clicking Browse, and now we have it selected here. And back in our Sword and Shield run, in our dust particles track, we can right-click, add notify, and take a look. We have Play Niagara Particle Effect. Now, it didn't populate the Niagara system, but that's okay. We can drag it in from the content drawer. And we can add another one right here. Add notify, Play Niagara Particle Effect, select it, and drag in that footstep dust. And now if we press play, we have the dust there. Now, the dust is only going to play right there at the root. It's not really playing at the location of the feet. But notice this notify has a socket name. Interesting, right? Well, if we search our asset browser for jog and double-click jog forward, we can select one of these notifies. Notice this one has foot_R. That's the name of the foot bone. And the next one has foot L. So we can set those in our run animation. So I'm going to search for sword because mine's called Sword and Shield Run, and select this first one here and scrub to it. I see that it's my left foot. So I'm going to change the socket name here to foot_L. And for the next one, I'll enter foot_R. And now if I press play, then the particle systems are spawned at the correct location, as we can scrub through and see. Isn't that cool? Awesome. So now we can press play, and we have sounds when we're running, and we have sounds when we're running with a sword, which again sounds pretty dangerous. So now that we have running sound effects, we need sound effects for when we jump and land. So we'll do that before we wrap up. Now, if we go back to the Foley folder, we can look for some landing sounds. Well, if we search for land, we have 8 of those. And also these cloth-heavy sounds sound like landing as well. So once again, this being something you know how to do, I'm going to have you make a meta sound called cloth heavy and another meta sound called footfall land. And I'll time-lapse the creation of those, as this is all repetitive information. All right, so now that I have 2 more sound effects for landing, I'd like to use these. So we have a jump land animation, and if we can't remember what animation it is, we can always go back and look at our animation blueprint, Echo Main States. And in here, we can go out to the anim graph, into Main States, and we have our land animation, and it's called Jump Idle Land. And take a look here. There are already several sound notifies. We have pouch sound, cloth sound, footfall sound, and land sound. So I'm going to go into my meta sounds folder, have these ready, And for land sound, I'm going to use footfall land. For footfall sound, I'm going to go ahead and use cloth heavy. And for cloth sound, I'll use my cloth run. Looks like there's a couple there. I'll see what happens when I put 2 there. And for pouch sound, I'm going to use my pouch heavy. And I'll see how this sounds. And that sounds great. Now I do have a animation played called Idle Fall, and it'd be nice to play a sound here. In fact, we do have a couple of sound notifies. And the notify track is called Foley Cloth Sound. So I'm going to select the first one and use my cloth heavy. And I leave it to you to experiment which sounds to use. I'm going to leave it at that for now. Let's see how this feels. I think that feels great. All right, excellent job. We now have sounds for running and jumping, and we have a lot of good practice under our belts creating meta sounds. And this is looking and sounding great. Awesome job. I'll see you in the next video.